What is the role of religion in our ever-changing world? From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Issues of Faith.
Hello everyone and welcome. I am Ben Hall. We are talking today about something that's been in the news a lot. We've seen these marches from hate groups in our area and really across the country. And something that is disturbing to many is that these groups often cloak themselves in religious language, in Christian language. They are using Christianity as a way to recruit and even justify what they are doing. We want to talk about that today. Happy to have with us Dr. Lee Camp. He is Professor of Theology and Ethics at Lipscomb University. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ben. Good to be here.
Are you seeing that? Is that what we're seeing, that these groups, these hate groups, are using Christianity to justify and recruit?
Certainly some of them, yeah, and certainly one of the groups that was key in the recent march in Shelbyville and Murfreesboro uses explicit Christian constructs and categories, and even speaks of a desire to return to a Christian nation and the like. So yes, that is true that some of that language is getting used.
And how is that? Why is that happening, do you think?
Well, of course, I find all of that sort of language deeply troubling and find it ironic and theologically problematic. At the same time, there is also this kind of very ugly historical fact that Christian language has often gotten co-opted for imperialistic purposes, for anti-Semitic purposes, for various forms of exclusion of whoever is seen as the other at the time. So it's not a new sort of phenomenon. It's an unfortunate fact that it's happened a lot, and we're seeing it happen now.
One of the reasons these groups said they were coming to our area was the shooting at a Church of Christ church at Burnett Chapel.
Right.
It was I believe a Sudanese African American who did that, and so they're coming here to protest that. You wrote something in the Tennessean about that. What are your thoughts when you hear that's one of their justifications for coming?
Yeah, I did do some op-ed writing that was actually published in some other places, but as I was reflecting upon that, I kind of took a cue from the Apostle Paul, he has this very funny passage at one place in the New Testament where he's very ticked off with his opponents, and he says, "Let me be a fool and recite my pedigree to let you know why I have some things to say to you." And so I thought, I'll try a cue from the Apostle Paul here and be a fool myself, and play off of the fact that I'm a white, male, Southern Christian, lifelong member of Churches of Christ. And I'm so Southern, Alabamian. I was weaned on NASCAR and Merle Haggard, and I've still kind of got Alabama red clay in my toenails, and Nashville a long time now. Love hot chicken and love the Ryman Auditorium. So as a white male Southern Christian, I've got some things to say about people who are talking about what it means to be Southern and what it means to be white and what it means to be a Christian. And so just at the level of using kind of the Burnett Chapel Church of Christ tragedy, one of the things that strikes me about it is it's really tacky. We know you don't use other people's tragedy for your own kind of self-centered purposes, but more than that, it's highly theologically problematic to use Christian categories, which are about what the Apostle Paul calls a ministry of reconciliation, of breaking down hostility, to then turn around and use that for fostering hostility. And so I wanted to say, at least as one person representing white, male, Southern Christians in Churches of Christ, no, this is not legit. This is not, we shouldn't be suckered in. And I think one of the things that's problematic is that if you look at some of the issues some of these groups talk about, some of the questions they raise are legitimate sorts of socio-political questions. But it is suffused with this sort of white supremacy that just, we don't want to go there, and it's not going to help anybody to go there, and it's just simply intellectually ill-construed and terribly unhelpful.
Do people see that, do you think? They must use this language and cloak themselves in this. I don't know if they believe it or if it is for recruiting. Are they able to twist the theology in such a way that they believe it? or is it for recruiting? Or I guess, do you have a sense of that?
Yeah. You know, I don't know enough about the history and the rise of contemporary white supremacist groups to necessarily answer that question. I did hear from one person who was representing one of these groups that was at the, said he was going to the rally, and he used some biblical constructs to kind of legitimate his perspective, which I did not find convincing in the least. But I do think that it's probably, I don't know, for myself, I don't assume that there's necessarily, and this is more, the position I'm about to articulate is more troubling, I think, because it would be easy to say these groups are simply trying to use Christianity. They don't believe the stuff that they're saying, and they're using it to sucker unsuspecting people in. I think some of these folks actually, this guy does believe that his Christianity is compatible with his white supremacy, and that's deeply troubling to me. And so I think that there is a question there of how is it that American Christianity is, how we've made it possible, or how have we contributed to a Christianity that makes that possible for some people. And that's a question that needs to weigh heavily on us, and we really need to be grappling with and pushing back against.
That's a good point. It is more troubling to think they actually believe it than to think they're just using it.
Yes.
And the people I've talked to, I'm going to agree with you. I think they actually believe it. And so then that does present a problem in a way for Christianity. How can that be?
Right.
How can it be so, I don't know, big, generic, whatever? How can that be?
Yeah.
How can they think Jesus would be out there doing what they're doing?
Yeah.
Saying the things they're saying. How can they think that?
Right. Well, one of the ways that theologians, some theologians and some historians would, with a very broad brush here, and we're not doing a closed theology lecture, but with a very broad brush would say that for many centuries, Christianity, especially going back to the time in which Christianity became legalized in the Roman Empire in the 4th century, and then became the only legal religion in the Roman Empire, which was a big deal because it went from being persecuted to now being able to persecute those who were not Christians, and within a 100-year period. And so many people point back to the 4th century as a place of where you have the rise of a new kind of Christianity, in the sense that Christianity is increasingly thought of as a religion. It's thought of as this thing that goes on between you and God. We've seen this go to seed in Western Christianity in the last 300 years, where Christianity is a religion. It's your private thing between you and God. Whereas in the early church, you don't see that. They've much more thought of Christianity as an altogether, all-encompassing way of life that had a competing authority to Caesar. And that's why, in some cases, Christians were persecuted, was because this Jesus that they served, they called Jesus Lord, and the Romans called Caesar Lord. And they called Jesus Son of God, and they called Caesar Son of God. And there was a very clear, you're making a choice here between what socio-political order you're subscribing to. And for the early Christians, this socio-political order under Jesus was this sort of non-violent, love of enemies, ministry of reconciliation, in which we're willing to suffer. So the hero for them were the martyrs, whereas the hero for the ancient Greco-Roman culture was the military hero. So those were two very different ways of life. But what happens then after the 4th century is Christianity gets reduced, we might say, to a religion. And then at the socio-political level, you do what the empire does. Mm-hmm. And so you think you have to bring about social change, and you have to get control of the mechanisms of power and the levers of power. And so we might say that what you see with white supremacist groups is similar in social strategy as very many Christian groups throughout the history of Christianity for the last many centuries. Mm-hmm. Am I making any sense with that?
Yeah, I think so. And so this, where are we now? Is it more religion is individualistic, it's between you and God, and that can lead to this kind of thing? Or is it that it's the government, and that, I guess, clarify that for me, because I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, clearly we have lots of individualistic forms of Christianity, which was one of the problems that happened in American Christianity among white Christians in responding to the civil rights movement in the 20th century. So, for example, there's plenty of cases in which Christians would say, white Christians would say things like, the gospel is about the salvation of souls and going to heaven when we die, and we don't have anything to do with political questions like race. Whereas this other kind of description of Christianity that I'm giving would say, oh, no, of course we have all sorts of things to do with race, because things like baptism, for example, in the early church baptism was a socio-political practice as construed by the Apostle Paul, because there's this terribly important passage in the New Testament where he takes all of the three major things that divided people in his day, Jews and Greeks, male and female, bond or free. And he says, if you're baptized into Christ, then the power of these boundaries has been broken down, and he says we are all now one in Christ. So baptism was an explicit socio-political act that broke down social barriers among people. But when your vision of Christianity is, no, it's about me doing the right religious thing so that when I die I can go to heaven, you can ignore the socio-political questions. On the other hand, some people with that individualistic kind of notion can say, well, that's my religion, and so now I have to have a Christian culture to prop up me doing that kind of thing, and so I'll do kind of whatever I have to do over here in the socio-political realm to protect my freedom of religion. But again, it's a very different construal of religion than some of these other visions.
Mm-hmm. And it is amazing to me that churches and religion was used to prop up slavery.
Sure.
You know, so we've seen it used in these ways, and so we're going to take a break now, but then I want to ask, coming back, with hate groups trying to co-opt it, and in some cases co-opting it, you know, what is the appropriate response? What should the religious community be doing and saying there? All right, we'll take a break. Be back right after this.